the virus mutating as it spreads around the populace, and this there's that. I encourage people to have a look at this Next Strain website, which has a rather interesting sort of proliferation dynamic sort of diagram chart thing that they've got. It's a bit hard to describe without actually showing it, but essentially you can sort of hit play and it shows you across a timeline how it actually spread out, and it's really quite interesting. But there was as a sidebar to that, there was also an interesting article on the ABC where they were talking about the original D strain that came out had mutated into what they're calling a G strain, which was a potential. Well, I guess the jury was out on it whether it was more contagious, but even if it was, it would seem that that's the one that's been proliferating around the place. But it also kind of suggests that if it really was like a more contagious strain, that the social distancing was more important than ever. And if it had been the original strain, which was potentially less contagious, we might have gotten even more on top of it when the social distancing stuff kicked in.
Yeah, look, I think there probably were a lot of people that predicted this right at the start, but nobody wanted to admit it until it happened. Now we're seeing this mutation, which means then now our only hope would be theoretically a vaccine. And if it ends up like the flu and it only works on, 3 out of 4 strains of corona, then, this will be the new norm. And that's not to, make it seem worse than it is, but I guess potentially that's what we're facing. So to see the mutation, it probably isn't unexpected. To see it be, probably won't be controlled by the same vaccine that would have controlled the D strain is probably not surprising also to a certain effect. But gosh, I mean, it's going to be a new world for sure if we keep getting news like this.
Well, just on that, I mean, it's kind of inevitable that if the longer the virus stays out, the more likely it's going to mutate, the more likely it's going to get around the place. And then if I guess the thing that we don't know at this point, because we're too early into it, is whether or not it then becomes something like the flu, where it just keeps coming back, over a certain period, whether it's yearly or if it's seasonal or whatever. And we just, we go out for our flu shot, and now we're also going out for our corona shot every year, and that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah, I know and that would be the best case. So if you had a vaccine that controlled, 80, maybe 90% of a corona outbreak, then you've effectively got a herd immunity that would stop it being so lethal or so dangerous. And that's where we have to hope we can get to. But look, I think we all know that it's going to take 12 to 18 months minimum before we get that. And I defy anyone, a political leader or just an ordinary person on the street, to predict what that's going to mean for us in terms of daily life. I mean, I think certainly in Australia we've been doing a fantastic job of keeping our heads as best as we can and sort of trying to maintain some sort of normality, whether it's work, play or other. But, it's, it's in some ways a little bit unsettling.
Yeah, well, might wrap it up there. And just as a final point is that I think it's sort of a combination of how the types of responses that we have in terms of fighting the virus, and then also having to deal with anything that it throws back at us along the way in terms of changes, mutations or whatever, and how that then affects for future responses. So it's going to be quite an interesting little ride over the next little while.
Well, if there is one positive out of all of this, we're lucky to a certain extent that corona is fairly innocuous, I guess, compared to Ebola or SARS. And I think the positive out of this is there'll be a lot more research into viruses, vaccines, and basically into outbreaks or pandemics such as this. And I think the good news story will be that when we emerge out of the other side here, we'll be a lot better equipped. And I don't think we'll ever see a situation like this again, probably over another 10 years, we'll have worked out ways to really control this.